And just like that, Canelo is still the undisputed 168-pound champion of boxing after defending it against the 154-pound undisputed champion Charlo. So it was a great fight. Unanimous decision by Canelo Alvarez. Obviously, the co-main event was a little bit more suspect with Ramos versus Lubin. But nonetheless, it was quite clear who the winner was in the main event tonight between Canelo versus Charlo. Right now, as we speak, Canelo is in the ring right now talking, and he's saying that he was in the training camp for 3 months without his family, just constantly concentrating on the boxing and training at up in Truckee, which is a high elevation area in California. But nonetheless, it was a great performance for Canelo Alvarez. A couple of things that I had noticed about Canelo Alvarez in terms of how Charlo performed, as in comparison to, let's say, the other fights that Charlo has had before. I noticed that Canelo is not only technical, but also extremely strong, which I think is really significant to try to understand, right? There's a lot of guys that are strong. Obviously, Francis Ngannou is strong, but it's strong enough, more than strong enough for him to knock people out. But he's not really the most technical guy, is he? And I would imagine that that is something Tyson Fury is looking to try to exploit in their upcoming boxing match next month. With Canelo, he has technique and power at the same time, meaning that when he moves forward at you, you kind of have this hesitant motion of what you're going to do, or whether you're going to go right, or whether you're going to go left, or whether you're going to throw, or whether you're not going to throw. So all of these things are very significant when you're dealing with Canelo. And again, he showed it again tonight. Now, in the heavier weight classes, we've seen how he performed with the likes of, let's say, Bivol, or maybe other bigger guys like, well, bigger guys that are not as skilled, such as Sergey Kovalev, or a Kovalev that was just down out in his twilight of his career, and then he was able to basically take them for the pickings in the right particular time at a heavier weight class. Let's see what else is Canelo saying right here. So Canelo is saying "Viva Mexico." He's being interviewed in the ring by the Showtime announcer. So what else can I take of this? Okay, so he's giving respect to Charlo right now. They're looking at each other and saying, "Hey, man, I respect what you did," as well as he should. You got to remember, Charlo went in there and stepped up in a weight class, two weight classes above him. So he's at 154. The next one is at 160. After that is 168. So you're literally talking about two jumps of a weight class for him to fight Canelo tonight. Now, obviously, Charlo is an undisputed champion, but an undisputed champion at a weight class that's two below him, but still an even matchup, because you got to think Canelo is not the biggest 168 guy. He's not the biggest 170 guy, 175 guy. But the fact of the matter is, Canelo is in there with a guy that's kind of his size, but a little bit taller, but chooses to fight at a smaller weight class. It would be very similar to, let's say, if, let's say, Colby Covington decided to fight at 155, let's say a match with Islam Makhachev in that weight class. That's sort of what it's like with Charlo and Canelo tonight. So Charlo right now is saying that he got hit with some hard shots and he felt like he recovered. There was somewhere in that overhand right where he just decided to take a knee. I just thought that that was very, very. Oh wait, what about this? How about this? Charlo is saying right now, "Hey, I want to fight Terrence Crawford," and I believe Terrence Crawford is in the crowd right now. Oh, he said he wants to get right back into training and fight Terrence Crawford straight away. So, did anybody feel this was a big fight card during the week? Did it give you that same vibe or not? I feel like it was one of those Canelo fight weeks that, well, I would have to say there were bigger Canelo fight weeks in this. I would say the Billy Joe Saunders fight was a lot bigger. Caleb Plant was a little bit bigger because of the controversy and the animosity that came along with it. What else? Maybe the likes of the Cotto fight was quite big. And, well, what else was a pretty big matchup for Canelo. Maybe all the other British fights that he had with the likes of Amir Khan, maybe even Rocky Fielding was, I believe, one of his zone debut of some sort. But yeah, it didn't give me that same vibe that I usually get out of a Canelo fight. And I don't know why. I think maybe it's just one of those things where perhaps maybe we or overestimated the fan base of Charlo to any degree. And for with Canelo fans, well, Canelo is a global superstar. He's one of those guys that can sell out on his own. But at the same time, it is one of those situations where you got to have the right dance partner at times in order for you to sell as well. You can't just be your own one guy, although there are many people that are like that in the fight game. Prince Nassim, you could say, was like that, a big draw all by himself. Anthony Joshua is a great example of that. And by the way, speaking of Anthony Joshua, I wonder how is going to affect his training with Derek James. Now, obviously, Derek James has been and has always been in world level boxing fights with his fighters, but it seems to be working a lot for Anthony Joshua. It seems to be a very good style for him in the current moment of time, and it seems to make him a much more improved heavyweight. But nonetheless, it's kind of hard to tell that because of the caliber of the heavyweights that Anthony Joshua is fighting. But I can tell you what works for him is going to work for him, and what works for other people may not work the same. So always got to keep an eye on that when people always change trainers and think that they're going to get a different result in a different type of gym. Okay, but nonetheless, when you look at Canelo Alvarez. I was going to say Leon Edwards because this is another guy who rarely really changed any teams or anything like that. But when you look at Canelo Alvarez, he's had the same trainer since he was a kid, which is who? None other than Eddie Reynoso. Eddie Reynoso was the same guy that has trained him from the amateurs all the way to the pros and all the way to a couple of undisputed championships that we see right now at 168. So again, it's great for Canelo that he's trained with the same guy, but for Anthony Joshua, it just didn't seem like one of those situations where he felt like, well, you know what, I may need to change a little bit. With Reynoso, I feel like this guy is an absolute boxing aficionado in terms of just how he understands the game. Now, he has other guys in his camp. He has Frankie Sanchez, the heavyweight who fought earlier tonight. He had Ryan Garcia in his camp. He has Andy Ruiz. So, once again, it's like it works for those guys. Or is it just Eddie Reynoso is just this great trainer that just has the right juice? I made a joke about tonight, Anthony Joshua saying something to the effect where, well, perhaps maybe after tonight he may leave Derek James and go with Eddie Reynoso. Now, I don't know how that's going to work out when Andy Ruiz is part of that camp, or if that's just a fight that they are just past and not really a point of animosity for any guy to be in. But nonetheless, it seems that Derek James seems to be the guy for Anthony Joshua, and Anthony Joshua seems comfortable there as much as Canelo Alvarez is very comfortable being in there with Eddie Reynoso and has proven to be a great trainer throughout all these years and taken him to all these different championship runs. So, what is next for Canelo after this? Does he go after Bivol? It seems to be the possibility, considering the fact that, well, when you have a situation that Canelo is just beating the hell out of everybody, and then here's this one guy that he has lost to, other than Mayweather, of course, which is no shame. But then you look at Bivol, maybe Bivol is going to go on to be one of the best 175 champions of all time. You never know. But nonetheless, Canelo seems to be in a position right now where he's just locked out of everything, right? He's the undisputed champion. He can't go up at 175. Maybe he can fight a couple of guys not named Bivol and see how he does there. But he seems to be in this position right now where, look, tonight you've seen there was nobody that he really called out. There was nobody out there that he was really interested in. He was just happy. He shouted out Mexico, which he usually does. He shouted out his family. He talked about his training camp after the fight. All pretty standard stuff, but no particular opponent in mind. There were times where he did call out Triple G in his post fights. He called out Billy Joe Saunders. He called out all top British names. He called out all top names from the United States, guys from the PBC, guys from Top Rank, guys from Frank Warren Promotions, guys from Matchroom. He calls out everybody tonight, not so much, and probably it has something to do with the fact that he's just locked out. He's fought everybody. There's really nobody left. And so it's one of these situations where he's going to go back and rest and possibly wait for a new opponent to emerge at some point. Oh, you know what? There is David Benavidez waiting in the wings. That is one of those names that a lot of people always mention to Canelo about, well, you got to fight this guy. And to be quite honest with you, I can't see anything different that would happen in that fight as opposed to any other fight, meaning that I could see Canelo winning that by a unanimous decision. And then on top of that, maybe even a knockout. And I'm talking about David Benavidez. David Benavidez, I don't think has the same caliber to really step up to Canelo in that type of world international level. I just don't think David Benavidez is that guy. Now, if you guys disagree and you think David Benavidez has a chance, I'd like to hear your opinion with some comments down below. But for now, I don't see that happening because of the fact that Charlo was one of these guys, both of the twins were one of the guys that people always talked about that Canelo needs to fight. And remember what I said in the racial undertone of Canelo versus Charlo in the video that I have in the video section, if you guys want to check it out. What I talk about there is the fact that there's a lot of people in the PBC and in the, well, YouTube American boxing community, and I'm saying that lightly in the most politically correct terms, that go and talk about how Canelo doesn't go out and fight slick African American fighters. But from what I seen tonight, it seemed that Canelo seemed to be the much more slicker fighter between the two. And if you disagree with that, please, once again, write on the comments below and tell me if you think that that is a fact or if it's not a fact or whatever you feel. But Canelo seemed to be the more technical guy, a lot more slick. Of course, he wasn't the super elusive footwork, Prince Nassim, Tyson Fury, Dominic Cruz type of guy that you've seen him, or even a Dominic Reyes in his prime type of guy in the way that he moves in and out of his angles and just hops around the ring. He didn't do none of that. Manny Pacquiao was also known for doing that, by the way. He didn't do any of that. He stood firm. He stood right in front of you. He fought Mexican style, as I had mentioned in the preview to this fight and the racial undertone of Canelo versus Charlo video. So all of that we got to see from Canelo tonight and not so much from Charlo. And I think it was because of the fact that Canelo was able to neutralize his game and prevent him from doing that. Now, here's a couple of things that I had noticed about boxing from an MMA perspective, because I always wonder, right? Like, if people know that there is a difference in rhythm when it comes to boxing and MMA. I'm going to give you an example. I've sparred and trained and competed in multiple combat sports. Okay. One of them happens to be mixed martial arts. The other happens to be kickboxing. I've delved into boxing when I was a young kid, growing up with boxing gyms around the New Jersey area. So there's a different rhythm in how you handle each of these different fighting disciplines. With MMA, from my experience, I could tell you it feels like the freest feeling that you get, especially if you have this elusive movement, you have this unorthodox way of fighting, and you have a very tricky way of standing and a tricky way of manipulating your striking your striking technique that you're trying to, let's say, uh impose on your opponent, right? So when you're that type of person and you're that type of fighter, you feel free, you feel like you can do anything the next minute. you're just throwing a jab. Then the next minute, you're throwing a spinning back kick. The next minute, you're throwing oblique kick, a John Jones oblique kick right down to the shins. Next thing you know, you're attempting a single leg, then you're going into a double leg, then you break away, and then after that you go for a flying knee, and then you go for a spinning attack of some sort, and then you do another spinning attack. So you're just coming from all these different angles. This is the mind of an unconventional minded MMA fighter going out there to perform and to fight and combat his enemy or his opponent, right? With a boxer, this is the mindset that they have. Well, I have a 1-2 jab. I'm either going to wait, I'm going to cut a certain angle, I'm going to cut them off at a certain side of the ring. And of course, a lot of these are the same in MMA, right? The aspect of cutting somebody off, the aspect of your footwork, the aspect of your jabs and 1-2s. Okay, all this is universal within the MMA and the boxing setting, and even in kickboxing as well. All right. Mic check. All right. All right. So we're back on. Sorry about that. Let me go back and see where exactly we left off with that. So what I was saying before the stream had just got cut off for just a brief moment of time is that I need you guys to understand that when you have a forward motion in the way that you, let's say, penetrate towards your opponent in a forward motion, right? Sometimes they're either going to back away or they're either going to move forward or meet you head on, or they're going to cut an angle and hit you from a different side or to hit you from a different uh, area that you may not see, whether it's from the light from the left or whether it's flanked from the right or the left or whether it's backing up or something to that extent. But what I'm saying is that a lot of it is just a certain level of strength that you can only get naturally, or it's just a certain level of strength that you can build up in the weight room. And by the way, a lot of it deals with functional training of some sort. If you guys are interested in trying to understand like how to build that front power that you have as a mixed martial artist, as a prize fighter, and whatnot. I'm going to show you guys some videos of, let's say, some of my training videos that I do when, let's say, we're doing something to the extent of building strength or building aggression as you're moving forward and whatnot. So I'm going to show you guys some video of some workouts that I do that sort of demonstrates that, so we can try to, I guess, get a good understanding of what I mean when you have these forward motions that can basically leave you undeniable when you go forward towards an opponent. And that's kind of what you saw tonight with Canelo. So this is, by the way, on my page on this. I mean, oh, is this okay? All right, so I'm going to show you.
When you get your next big idea, say sparkly ketchup, Grammarly.
All right, so I wanted to give you guys just a little example of what exactly it is that I do when it comes to, let's say, building your forward strength motion. So that's kind of what Charlo felt tonight, was this undeniable forward strength motion that Canelo was imposing against him and that he could do nothing about. Because, like I said, as I've mentioned earlier in the stream, I had mentioned that Charlo has never dealt with anyone like this before. So you got to wonder if he's able to deal with somebody like that. I mean, that kind of puts you at one of the greatest of all time levels, but very few people are able to deal with Canelo's forward motion unless, of course, you're Bivol, which is a guy that's a lot bigger. So, what exactly does that tell you? Well, one of the things that tells you is that Canelo is a very exceptional fighter in a way where, yes, he's a natural 154-pound fighter that moved up a weight class, but his particular skill translates in the upper echelons of different divisions. However, it has a limit, and we've seen those limits. What are those limits? Those limits were Bivol. And that is why you're never going to see Canelo go back there again. Now, I wanted to mention earlier some things that I had mentioned. Okay. Earlier, I had mentioned something to the effect that Canelo right now is literally locked out of whatever matches he has going on. I think the only one that he truly has right now is David Benavidez. And if you really want to push it, or in other words, if that guy really wants to push it because he's the smaller guy moving up, Terrence Crawford, he can go do that. But obviously, Charlo went out there and challenged Terrence Crawford tonight after that particular in ring interview. He said, "Hey, man, I'd like to fight what's his name? Terrence Crawford. I know he's here tonight." But Terrence Crawford probably left the arena when Charlo had already called him out or something to that extent. But it's great, right? He is an undisputed champion at 154. Terrence Crawford has a chance to get another undisputed championship in the next weight class over. So he was champion at 140, now at 147, then at 154 if him and Charlo actually go through with it. So it's a great opportunity for him. Just like Canelo, he's become undisputed at 168, has held belts in multiple weight classes. This is what it's all about. Look, I've said this in the previous streams and the previous videos that I've had on this channel multiple times. This is one of the greatest eras of combat sports, and you can't deny that. One of the most beautiful things about it is the simple fact that these guys, whether it would be boxing or MMA, they're out there taking the risk that you need in order to be called the greatest of all time. And it is no wonder that we call this the greatest era of combat sports. Can you guys remember back in the days when the zone didn't have a television deal? All these British fighters that you had seen back in the days, we're talking about like 2010, 2011. By the way, a very pivotal time of me being an MMA fan, because guess what? It was one of those eras where MMA fights didn't come every week the way that it does now. So when they came and when you had a party for your friends, it was a very big deal. Whereas now it's just way saturated, not just with the UFC, but on top of other organizations that are out there. So because of that, I went out and watched some boxing on the side. I looked up some boxing that was going on in the UK. I thought to myself, wow, you know what? The UK really knows how to put on boxing shows. Now, it's always this stigma that a lot of British fighters have back in the days and always, right? And I've mentioned this in the UK versus USA stream that I did. And I talked about something to the effect of how most British guys grow up in the boxing scene wishing to box in Las Vegas or New York in MSG, with the likes of Anthony Joshua being able to do that against Andy Ruiz. And obviously, we know how that went. But nonetheless, now that the landscape is a little bit different, it's just more like that the British guys are the ones that are inviting all the American guys to come over and prove themselves. And I'm talking literally within the heavyweight division, because the heavyweights of boxing right now have to go over there in the UK and prove themselves. Very contrasting to the days of, let's say, David Price, when he was the top prospect, the man that Tyson Fury avoided all these years because he didn't want to take on another 6'9" guy that could present certain challenges to him in a very undeveloped stage of Tyson Fury's career. And then during that time, as I was saying, I was watching British boxing in the same time that I was watching the George St. Pierre and Anderson Silva era. Now, what's significant about that? Back then, if you wanted to watch British boxing, you either had to illegally look it up online, sites like VIP Box, VIP League, Buff Streams, or at the time it was First Row Sports. But listen, not to dry snitch in any kind of way. I mean, these sites still exist, but that's neither here or there. You guys know, all the streamers know, all the hardcore fans know. You love this sport, you love boxing, you love MMA, but still everybody goes out there and delves into a little bit of some, let's say, illegal streaming, especially when it's very tempting, and especially if you're dealing with the likes of Logan Paul, who's going out there suing his opponent prior to the fight. And you got to think to yourself, how do you get behind a guy like that? So yeah, that's definitely a guy right there that you would want to steal his stream from, just based on acting like that. But nonetheless, a little disclaimer: I am an entertainer, I am a podcaster, I am a streamer, a YouTuber. I do not condone any illegal actions of any kind. This is just all strictly entertainment talk, but you guys know that. Nonetheless, moving on forward. So during that time, in the British boxing days of 2010, David Haye, David Price, who else was the top guy? Derek Chisora when he was undefeated, Tyson Fury when he had hair, when he was a British champion and was calling out the likes of Cain Velasquez. That was the days of British boxing where it seemed sort of dark, right? It seemed like boxing was always there. There's always people that are watching it. But nowadays, especially in the post AJ Mania era, it seemed that they brought in these new fans that they never had before. Certainly, AJ brought in new fans. Certainly, Canelo brought this fan base of people that were not only generational, but also people that appeal to, let's say, the newer generation of people that like Canelo's swagger. They like the way that he talks. They like the way that he dresses. They like the way that now he speaks English. And by the way, how about this new evolution of Canelo's life, where he is now an English speaking fighter reaching out to a whole different wide range of audience? And then on top of that, you add to the fact that you have all these undisputed fights. My goodness, it is one of the greatest eras of combat sports we have ever witnessed. So because of that, you can't deny any of these guys from getting any undisputed championships that they want. If for whatever reason Terrence Crawford wants to go up to 154 and challenge for the 155, 154 undisputed championship against Charlo, let him, because he deserved it. Charlo also deserves that. Him taking on a big name like Canelo like that tonight, sort of giving a good account of himself. Obviously not the best performance. It was a little bit lackluster, considering the fact that, once again, the forward motion pressure of Canelo really debilitated him in a way that just made him limited in the actions that he was willing to take tonight. But nonetheless, he didn't get knocked out. He survived. He survived that overhand right. He made a veteran move and taken a knee after that because he just knew he had nothing left. So for him to do that gave him a little bit of that time of alleviating the pain and for him to recover. So very savvy veteran move on him. Obviously, for some, they would sort of look at that as some sort of cowardly move of some sort, or maybe a move that's just not one way or the other ethical and whatever standards you want to put it. But nonetheless, it was a veteran move that he made. Just like Mayweather putting his forearms on you when he's clinching you and things of that nature. And then these little elbow shots that KSI hits you with out of nowhere. But these are all veteran moves. And he was able to display that, and also just gave a good account of himself, because you know what? He dared to be great, just like a lot of these guys dare to be great. So if Terrence Crawford wants to go out there and dare himself to be great like he did with the Spence fight, let him. Same thing with Tank. If he wants to go out there and get a money fight against Sean O'Malley, why not? Let him. He earned it. And for Francis Ngannou, obviously he got his Tyson Fury fight after winning and defending the UFC championship belt. But now that's done away from the UFC, right? Where the UFC is no longer a part of that in any capacity. So therefore, you're now in a situation where Francis Ngannou is doing this as a free agent, and he gets all the money with nothing shared towards the UFC, all going to him and his team and his management and his training camp and everything in between, right? But nonetheless, it would have been nice to have the UFC machine behind that fight. But now, what I'm curious to see is how this PBC tour that Canelo has going on, where is it going next? Now, I've said earlier that Canelo seems to have beaten all the matches and all the top names that he could in his particular era. What is next? Sure, there's other names out there, names that I've mentioned earlier, like David Benavidez is in the wings. Maybe somebody like Arthur Beterbiev. How about that? Now, how come nobody is ever talking about Arthur Beterbiev? We're talking about a guy that has a 100% knockout ratio. Now, am I biased towards Arthur Beterbiev because he's a Muslim fighter? I'm going to tell you 100% I am. But my goodness, if you told me there was a guy out there that had a 100% ratio knockout and he was in between the weight classes that Canelo can compete in, I say sign me up. Where do we get this fight going? How do we find this guy and how do we get it going? Well, here's the problem that I had mentioned. Earlier, I had said something to the effect that Canelo does go out there and dare himself to be great. Now, the problem is he has upper bound limits to where he can be great at. Obviously, in the 168 division tonight, he proved the upper echelons of his greatness and the limits of his greatness. But that's exactly what I mean. That is his limits because his limits was what? 175. Try to go up against Bivol. We saw what happened. So what would happen with a fight against Arthur Beterbiev, who has a 100% knockout ratio, a guy who a lot of people are avoiding and are just waiting to get old so that they can make easy pickings of him at the latter stages of his career, but showing no signs of it. So now what are they doing? They're having Arthur Beterbiev fight the likes of Arthur Beterbiev taking on Bivol later on this year, right? Is that correct? If that's so, then I guess that's the big marquee fight for Arthur Beterbiev. Again, it's not Canelo, unfortunately, because I would like to have Arthur Beterbiev fight the bigger names. But guess what? Him fighting Bivol after getting a win off of Canelo and then getting a win off of Ramirez, now taking him on afterwards, I think that's the next best thing for his career. And you know what? What's great about that for Arthur Beterbiev is that now he's in a situation where he can be just a Joe Galzaghi, getting out of his career undefeated, unscathed, but not really having the notoriety or the clout that he deserves. Because let's face it, Joe Calzaghe, he beat some big names at the end of his career. We're talking about Bernard Hopkins and Roy Jones Jr. But very few people in the world know who Joe Calzaghe is. A lot of people know who Roy Jones is. Certainly, a lot of people in Russia know who Roy Jones is. He's a Russian citizen, and they made him a Russian citizen because they love combat sports athletes. And he was one of the biggest combat sports athletes of all time. And then he decided to move to Russia, and then they gave him citizenship. Well, what about Joe Galzaghe? What if he was to go to Ukraine or Russia? Would anybody just off the top recognize him? Maybe just a few people, maybe a few boxing fans, maybe a few hardcore boxing fans. But other than that, Joe Calzaghe walks around the streets of Wales, walks around the streets of London to Manchester and Scotland with barely anybody ever noticing him or know who he is. And to, by the way, whose fault? None other than his own. And you can ask Frank Warren that, because when Frank Warren used to ask Joe Calzaghe back in the days, hey, let's do some promos. Hey, let's do some radio interviews. Let's go do some TV interviews. Good Morning Britain, BBC Radio in London, or this and that. Nah, can't be bothered. Can't do this. I don't want to do that. I don't want to talk to anybody. I just want to go sit and train. Okay, Joe Calzaghe, that's fine. But then he ends up winning all these big matches and nobody really cares. Nobody really knows him. That's kind of where Arthur Beterbiev is at. And then it doesn't help that a lot of people are avoiding him and only a few people know who he is, which is the hardcore boxing fans. But nonetheless, it's a respectable career. He'll be all right. He lives in Chechnya, or lives in Canada at least, but for sure is being sponsored by the Chechnyan dictator Ramzan Kadyrov. So I'm sure that he'll be living all right without having to really worry about the money that he may have missed out on. But then again, you also got to understand this fight game is not really just all about money all the time. It really isn't. Sometimes for some guys, this is about proving that they are the greatest of all time. Unfortunately, when you reach a certain level, it's kind of like what Marvin Hagler said, right? It's hard to get up and run when you're waking up in silk sheets. Canelo wakes up in silk sheets every morning and yet still wants to prove that he's the best in the world. Kobe Bryant was the same way. Obviously, we're talking about basketball and other sports where these guys are dominant, Tom Brady. But then we're talking about sports that, well, I mean, you can argue isn't really combat or doesn't have the same dire consequences. Maybe, of course, other than football, with the same amount of CTE that you get out of that. But that's neither here or there. The point of the matter is what you do get out of this particular situation with Canelo is a very unique one where a guy has all this generational wealth in his disposal and yet continues to go out there and fight animals like Charlo and guys who still have all to prove in the world and yet goes out there and dominates. Now, one, you got to understand how impressive that is in hindsight to just even say that. Okay, look at this guy. He is the best in the world. He's able to dominate guys when he already has everything. Well, that's a little easier to say also because you got to think that when you are rich, you have all the money in the world, you have all the resources, you have all the medicine, all the vitamins. And when I mean vitamins, I'm saying that in a very nice way, in a very kind way, in a very non condescending way, in a way where I'm not accusing Canelo's beef handlers of any way, but you know what I mean. You get the best resources in the world other than the best trainers and whatnot and the best facilities. So you can continue on having the right training. But by the end of the day, it's a choice because, yes, you do have all those resources in the world, but do you use them? The way that people are criticizing Conor McGregor right now, he has all the riches in the world, but is he using them? No, rather, what he's doing is using his business platform to build other businesses and promote other things to create side ventures and side hustles for his next uh, eh, whatever situation he wants to get in next. He's not using it to get new trainers or train somewhere new or train in a different facility or use his money to pay guys to come in and train with him or spar with him or none of this. It's just a matter of choice. But you look at Canelo, his choice is that no boxing, no life, right? He lives a life of a warrior. This is what he does. He's concentrated on his craft, whether he has all the money in the world or whether he's back in the barrios of Guadalajara, Mexico. That's why he is the best in the world right now. But you also have to understand when you are the best in the world, there are limits. And Canelo knew that. But we also have to give credit to letting us know that, you know what, this is your upper bound limits. This is where you can go. Now, look, as much as I love Khabib and as much as I think that he is the greatest fighter of all time, guess what? One of the biggest criticisms they have against him is that he never went up a weight class. So we never got to know if he can handle the likes of Colby Covington, Leon Edwards, and so on and so forth. Now, do we have an idea? Yes, we do. At the same time, you also got to understand guys like Khabib don't care what you think. That's not what they got into sport for. Just like Arthur Beterbiev, who also comes from the same culture as Khabib. He doesn't care what any of you think, which is why he never bothered trying to promote himself, never bothered trying to become the best English speaker that he can be. With Canelo, he is locked into all those things. He's locked into being the best boxer. He's locked into being the top entertainer of the game, meaning that that's the reason why he's learning English to be able to communicate with people in the game a whole lot better. But that is the difference that you see with Canelo and everybody else that's in the fight game that has already made it. You look at Billy Joe Saunders. He got a fight with Canelo, big payday. And now he's having a hard time coming back. I think he's coming back in December or something to that extent. But nonetheless, that's Billy Joe Saunders for you in a nutshell. Getting all that money after that fight he had with Canelo. He was supposed to fight Canelo way earlier. in the pre-pandemic days, but never happened. And then after the pandemic, they ended up fighting. But then again, here we are. After that fight, gets his eye busted, breaks his will up a little bit. I think that had a lot to do with it as well, because I think, yes, it's a lot easy for Canelo to constantly be in these fights, get back and get back on. But you also got to understand Canelo has never been slept. So because of the fact that he's never been slept in that kind of way, guess what? It's easier for him to come back. Now, what would happen if he was to get slept, if he was to get really seriously hurt by somebody out there, and then he has to come back and do it all over again, like what he did in the post Bivol fight? He came back and obviously fought Triple G, and then here we are in the Charlo fight. Yes, but what if he got slept? Could he get back in that kind of way? Well, that is a question that remains, and that is why they call this the theater of the unknown when it comes to combat sports. So I hope you guys enjoyed the fights. I hope you liked the review and the post fight coverage that I did. I hope that you liked all my takes. I hope that you understand my takes and where I'm coming from with them. And by the way, check out all the videos that I've had in the past and in the most recent ones that I've had recently. And by the way, don't forget to like and subscribe to the most epic combat sports channel in the world. Not just mixed martial arts, but covering all the big fights, including Canelo and Charlo tonight, and many of the other big boxing fights that are coming up with Logan Paul versus Dylan Dennis, KSI versus Tommy Fury, and then you have Islam Makhachev headlining against Charles Oliveira for the second time for the 155 division. And then you have Tyson Fury taking on Francis Ngannou. And then weeks after that, actually, you have Stipe Miocic taking on John Jones. And then a month later after that, you have headlining Colby Covington taking on Leon Edwards. Now, a lot of those fights don't seem really big right now, but as the closer that you get, the bigger that they feel. So right now, Islam Makhachev and Charles Oliveira just seems like a fight that we have already seen back in UFC